Life on the Eternal Throne was strange for Daniel. The ship was larger than any city he had ever seen. Its walls were made of living crystal that hummed with energy. The furniture floated in the air. The food glowed with colors he could not name. But he adapted. That was what humans did. Queen Seraphina gave him rooms near her own quarters. They were beautiful and cold, filled with Volanti art and technology. Daniel spent his first week learning how to use the basic systems. He learned how to call for servants, how to order food, how to access the ship's information network. He also started learning the Volanti language. The nobles of the court thought this was amusing at first. Humans were supposed to be simple creatures, good at fighting, but not much else. They did not expect Daniel to master their tongue in just 1 month. But he did that. By the end of that month, Daniel could speak with any Volanti on the ship without a translator. His accent was terrible, but his words were correct. The nobles stopped laughing. Some of them started watching him more carefully. Seraphina noticed this change. She had expected her new husband to be quiet and useless, a political tool and nothing more. Instead, she found him in the ship's library every night, reading history books and military reports. She found him in the training rooms every morning, exercising his weak human body until he could barely stand. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" she asked him one day. Daniel looked up from his reading. Dark circles hung under his eyes. "Because I need to understand your people if I'm going to help them." "Help them? You are a human. You are here because of a treaty, not because we need you." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is true, but I am here now, and I would rather be useful than useless." Seraphina did not know what to say to this. Her people valued strength and power, not service. The idea of a royal consort wanting to be useful was strange to her. But she found herself curious about this odd human. She started inviting him to court meetings. At first, he just listened. He sat in a corner and watched as her admirals argued about borders and trade routes and military movements. He never spoke unless someone asked him a question. But he remembered everything. One evening, Admiral Kethra was complaining about a problem with their patrol ships. 3 vessels had disappeared near the border with the Crethony Collective, a race of insect-like creatures who had been causing trouble for years. "We should send a fleet to destroy them," Kethra declared. Her crystal skin glowed red with anger. "Show them the cost of attacking us," the other admirals agreed. They began planning an attack that would strike deep into Crethony space. Daniel raised his hand. Everyone stopped talking. They stared at this human who dared to interrupt their war council. "Speak," Seraphina said. Curious what he would say, Daniel stood and walked to the holographic map in the center of the room. He touched several points, highlighting the locations where the Volanti ships had disappeared. "These attacks are not random," he said. "Look at where they happened. All 3 ships vanished in sectors far from Crethony core territory. If they wanted war, they would attack closer to home where they could defend their gains." Admiral Kethra scowled. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that something is wrong with the Crethony, something they do not want us to see." Daniel pulled up more information on the map. In the past 2 months, 3 of their hive queens have gone silent. Hive queens do not just disappear. Something is killing them. The room fell quiet. "If you attack now," Daniel continued, "you will be walking into a trap. Not one set by the Crethony, but by whatever is hunting them. You will fight a war on 2 fronts against enemies you do not understand." Admiral Kethra's glow shifted from red to orange. She was still angry, but she was also thinking, "What would you suggest instead, human? Send a diplomatic mission. Offer the Crethony help instead of war. They are scared, and scared creatures make useful allies. You will learn what is really happening, and you will gain their loyalty at the same time." The admirals looked at each other. This was not how the Volanti did things. They conquered. They dominated. They did not offer friendship to their enemies. But Daniel's logic was hard to argue with. Serafina made her decision. We will try diplomacy first. Prepare an envoy for the Crethony border. The admirals bowed and left, still muttering to each other. When they were gone, Serafina turned to Daniel. How did you see what they could not? Daniel's eyes were tired but sharp. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We have learned that the obvious enemy is rarely the most dangerous one. It is the enemy you do not see that kills you. Serafina thought about this for a long time after Daniel returned to his quarters. Her people were old and powerful. They had built an empire that stretched across 17 star systems. They had technology that humans could barely understand. But they had grown used to being the strongest thing in any room. Humans were different. They were weak and short-lived and fragile. But they had survived by being careful, by watching, by thinking before they acted. Daniel was not strong. He was not powerful. He did not have any special abilities that made him dangerous, but he was smart. And Serafina was beginning to realize that smart might be more valuable than strong. The diplomatic mission to the Crethony was a success. Daniel had been right. Something terrible was hunting the insect creatures, and they were desperate for allies. The Volanthi envoy returned with a treaty of friendship and a warning. The Devourers were coming. Serafina had heard of them only in ancient texts. They were a species so old that her ancestors had called them gods. They slept in the void between galaxies, waking every few thousand years to feed. They consumed everything in their path. Worlds, ships, entire civilizations, and now they were awake again. When this news reached the court, the admirals panicked. They argued and shouted and blamed each other for not seeing the danger sooner. Some wanted to run, others wanted to fight. None of them had any idea what to do. Daniel sat quietly through all of it. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were focused and sharp. Serafina watched him and wondered what he was thinking. She knew, somehow, that this moment would change everything. The galaxy was about to face its greatest test, and her strange human husband was about to show everyone what he was truly capable of. The Volanthi Empire had been at war with humanity for 3 long years. Queen Serafina ruled the Volanthi from her massive ship called the Eternal Throne. Her people had skin like crystal that glowed in different colors. They were tall and beautiful and very powerful. Before meeting humans, they had conquered 17 star systems without much trouble. But humans were different. The first time Volanthi ships attacked a human colony, they expected an easy victory. Instead, the humans fought back with a fury that surprised everyone. They used weapons the Volanthi had never seen. They set traps that destroyed entire fleets. They refused to surrender even when they were losing. Queen Serafina lost thousands of soldiers in that first year. She lost more in the second. By the third year, even her strongest admirals were tired of fighting. The humans seemed to multiply no matter how many the Volanthi killed. For every colony that burned, 2 more appeared deeper in space. The Galactic Council finally stepped in. They were a group of elder species who tried to keep peace in the galaxy. They called both sides to a meeting and made a simple offer. End the war through marriage. It was an old tradition. 2 enemies could become one family. The Volanthi queen would marry a human, and both sides would stop fighting. Serafina did not like this idea. She was proud. Her ancestors had built an empire through strength, not through compromise. But she was also tired. She had watched too many of her people die against an enemy that should have been easy to defeat. She agreed to meet the human they had chosen. His name was Daniel Hayes. He came from a colony world called New Montana, which no longer existed. The Volanthi had destroyed it 2 years ago. Serafina found this fact interesting. Why would the humans send a man whose home she had burned? Daniel arrived on her ship in a small shuttle. He wore a military uniform with medals on his chest. He was not tall by Volante standards. His skin did not glow. He had no natural weapons, no armor, no special powers that she could see. He looked completely ordinary. Serafina met him in her throne room. She sat on a chair made of living crystal while he stood before her like any other visitor. Her guards stood ready in case he tried anything foolish. "You are the one they sent," she said. Her voice echoed through the room. Daniel nodded. "I am. Do you know what this marriage means? You would be bound to me. Your people would stop expanding into our space. Your military would stand down. And your people would stop burning our colonies," Daniel said. His voice was calm. "Our children would stop dying in their sleep." Serafina felt something strange when he said this. She had ordered the attack on his world. She had watched the reports as it burned. Now this man stood before her, speaking of dead children. And he was not screaming for revenge. "You speak like you have lost much," she said. "New Montana was my home." Daniel did not look away from her eyes. "I was in an escape pod when your ships arrived. I watched from space as everything I loved turned to fire and ash." The throne room was silent. Seraphine's guards shifted nervously. They expected the human to attack, to curse, to do something violent. But Daniel just stood there, his hands at his sides, his face showing nothing. "Then why?" Serafina asked. "Why agree to marry the queen who destroyed your world?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "Because I am tired of watching people die. Yours and mine. If this marriage stops the bleeding, I will pay any price." Serafina did not understand this human. Her people valued strength and power. They did not marry their enemies. They crushed them. But something in Daniel's words touched a part of her she did not know existed. She stood from her throne and walked down the steps toward him. Her guards moved to follow, but she waved them back. Up close, Daniel looked even more fragile. His skin was soft. His bones would break easily. He had none of the natural defenses that made the Volante so dangerous. And yet he stood before her without fear. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "I have lost everything that mattered to me," Daniel replied. "Fear is for people who still have something to lose." Serafina studied his face. Humans were hard to read. They did not glow or change color with their emotions like her people did. But she could see something in his eyes. It was not anger or hatred. It was something deeper and sadder that it was grief. Pure and endless grief. "The wedding will take place in 3 weeks," she said. "You will stay on my ship until then. My servants will give you quarters and clothing and food." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet, human. You do not know what you are agreeing to." Daniel almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely visible, but it changed his whole face for just a moment. "Neither do you, my queen." The wedding happened on a space station in neutral territory. 1,000 guests watched as Serafina and Daniel stood together before the council elders. She wore the ancient armor of her royal house. He wore his military uniform. When they bound their hands together with quantum thread, Serafina looked at her new husband and wondered what she had done. This ordinary human was now part of her empire, part of her family, part of her life. The war was over. But something new had begun. As they left the ceremony, Daniel walked beside her in silence. She could feel the eyes of every alien species in the galaxy watching them. Some were curious. Some were angry. Some were afraid. None of them knew what would come next. Neither did Serafina. She had married this human for peace, thinking it would be simple. She thought he would fade into the background of her court, a symbol and nothing more. She was very wrong. In the months and years ahead, she would watch this quiet, Broken Man rise to become the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen. She would see him unite enemies, topple empires, and reshape the very nature of civilization itself. But on that day, as they walked together into an uncertain future, she saw only a man who had lost everything and was trying to find a reason to keep living. She had no idea that reason would change everything. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Ships from 37 different species gathered at a neutral station in the center of known space. Every major civilization sent their leaders, their generals, their scientists. Everyone was afraid. Queen Seraphina attended with Daniel at her side. She watched as representatives from across the galaxy argued and shouted at each other. The Thrall, a species of tentacled beings, blamed the Crethani for waking the Devourers. The Crethani blamed the Volanthi for not helping sooner. Others simply demanded that someone do something, anything, to stop the coming darkness. 3 days passed. Nothing was decided. Daniel sat through every meeting without speaking. He listened to every argument. He studied every face. And on the third day, when the shouting had reached its loudest point, he stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. The room fell silent. Every alien eye turned to look at this small human who dared to interrupt their council. "You are all going to die," Daniel said. His words echoed through the chamber. Several species made sounds of anger or fear, but no one spoke. "You have been arguing for 3 days," Daniel continued. 3 days while the Devourers move closer. 3 days while they consume everything in their path. You argue about who is to blame. You argue about who should lead. You argue about who should sacrifice. And while you argue, they get stronger. He pulled up a holographic image in the center of the room. It showed a Devourer ship, a massive thing of dark metal and strange angles. It looked like something from a nightmare. "This is what you are afraid of. I understand. They are old and powerful and terrifying. But look at them. Really look." Daniel began to highlight parts of the image. He pointed to energy patterns, communication nodes, structural weaknesses. They are not gods. They are not invincible. They are a species that got very good at one thing, eating everything in their path. But they have been asleep for 10,000 years. They do not know what the galaxy has become. They do not know what we have learned. The Thrall ambassador raised a tentacle. "And what have we learned, human? What can we do against creatures that have destroyed entire civilizations?" Daniel met the ambassador's eyes. "You can stop being afraid of each other. You can stop fighting over old grudges and dead borders. You can realize that none of your past conflicts matter if the Devourers win." He looked around the room, meeting the gaze of every species. The Devourers have never faced a united galaxy. They have always hunted isolated prey, picking off species one by one. They expect you to be divided. They expect you to be afraid. They expect you to run. Daniel's voice grew stronger. But they have never met humans. We have spent our entire existence finding new ways to kill things bigger and stronger than ourselves. We have hunted creatures to extinction. We have survived disasters that should have ended us. We split the atom and touched the stars, and never once stopped fighting long enough to get comfortable. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Devourers are ancient, but they are just another predator. And we have been killing predators since before we could walk upright. The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then the Crethani ambassador began to click her mandibles. It was their way of showing approval. Other species joined in. Tentacles waved. Crystals glowed. Sounds of agreement filled the chamber. Within an hour, the council had agreed to form a united command structure. And they had placed humanity at its center. Daniel walked out of the chamber with Seraphina beside him. Her mind was racing with what she had just witnessed. "How did you do that?" she asked. They were ready to tear each other apart. Now they are working together. Daniel's face was tired but focused. Fear is powerful, but hope is stronger. They were all afraid because they felt alone. I showed them they were not alone. But you put humanity in charge. We were the newcomers here, the youngest species. Why would they follow us? Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. His eyes were serious. Because we have nothing to lose. The Volanthi have an empire. The Thrall have their homeworld. The Crethani have their hives. Every species here has something they want to protect, something they are afraid to risk. He shook his head slowly. Humans are different. We are colonizers. We spread across the galaxy because we were running from our own destroyed planet. We have already lost our home once. We know what it feels like to have nothing left. That makes us dangerous, because we are willing to do what others will not. Serafina thought about this. She remembered the day they met, when Daniel had told her about watching his world burn. She had thought his lack of fear meant he was broken. Now she understood it was something else entirely. He was free. The unified fleet assembled over the following weeks. Ships from every species gathered at a staging area in neutral space. It was the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. And at its center was a human, giving orders that admirals and generals obeyed without question. Daniel worked every hour of every day. He studied Devour movements. He analyzed their attack patterns. He found weaknesses that no one else had noticed because no one else had been willing to look closely enough. Serafina watched him transform. The quiet, grieving man she had married was still there, but something else had awakened inside him. He moved with purpose. He spoke with authority. He made decisions that sent thousands of ships into battle. And he won. The first engagement against the Devourers was a victory. Not a complete victory, but enough to prove that they could be hurt. Daniel's tactics had worked. The galaxy began to believe. But the war was just beginning. The Devourers were vast and ancient and hungry. For every victory, the Alliance won. The enemy adapted and struck back harder. Daniel knew this would be a long fight. He knew many would die before it was over. But for the first time since New Montana burned, he had something to live for. He had a purpose. He had a people. He had a wife who looked at him not with pity, but with respect. The war for the galaxy had begun. And Daniel Hayes, the ordinary human who had lost everything, was going to finish it. The war against the Devourers lasted 3 terrible years. Every species in the Alliance gave everything they had. Ships burned. Soldiers died. Entire worlds were lost to the hungry darkness, but they kept fighting. Daniel led from the front. He refused to stay safe behind the lines while others faced death. He flew missions into enemy territory. He stood on the bridges of ships that were falling apart around him. He walked through the wreckage of battles to find survivors. Serafina worried about him constantly. He was human, fragile in ways her people could not understand. A single blow that would merely bruise a Volanthi could kill him. But she also understood why he did it. His soldiers needed to see him. They needed to know that their commander was willing to share their danger. And Daniel needed to be there, to witness every victory and every loss with his own eyes. The Alliance grew stronger with each passing month. The Volanthi provided massive firepower from their crystal ships. The Crethani sent endless waves of soldiers who felt no individual fear. The Thrall managed the supplies across thousands of light years. And the humans brought their strange gift for creative destruction. Daniel studied the Devourers like no one else. He learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. Yes, even the ancient monsters had fears. They were afraid of fire that they could not consume. They were afraid of weapons that hurt them in ways they did not understand. And they were very afraid of humans. Admiral Kethra noticed this during one battle. A devourer ship that had been advancing suddenly retreated when it identified human vessels in the fleet. "They run from you," she said to Daniel afterward. "Why? Your ships are not the strongest. Your weapons are not the most powerful." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because we are unpredictable. Every other species fights the same way every time. You have tactics that have worked for centuries, so you keep using them. But humans change constantly. We adapt. We invent new ways to kill with every battle." He looked out at the stars through the bridge windows. "The Devourers have been eating civilizations for millions of years. They have seen everything. Except us. We are new, and we scare them." Catherine's crystal skin flickered with something like respect. "You are not what I expected, human. When you first came to us, I thought you were weak. I thought the Queen had made a mistake. And now? Now I think you might be the most dangerous thing in this galaxy." The turning point of the war came at a place called the Crimson Veil. It was a vast cloud of gas and dust. Red as blood, where the Devourers had built their largest base. 3 of their world ships hid inside, processing the remains of 2 civilizations they had consumed. Daniel proposed a plan that everyone called insane. "We detonate antimatter charges inside the nebula," he explained to the War Council. "The gas will amplify the explosion. We can destroy all 3 world ships in a single strike." Admiral Kethra frowned. "The blast will kill everything within 100 light years, including our own ships. Our ships will be outside the blast radius. Barely. But someone has to carry the charges inside. The Devourers will stop any automated delivery. It has to be a piloted mission." The room went silent. Everyone understood what Daniel was saying. The pilots who flew the charges into the nebula would not come back. "I will lead the mission myself," Daniel said. Sarfina stood before anyone could speak. "No, I will lead it." Every eye turned to her. Daniel's face went pale. "Sarafina, you cannot. You are the Queen. Your empire needs you. My empire needs this war to end." Her voice was steady and strong. "I have asked others to die for our alliance. If I am not willing to do the same, then I am not worthy to lead." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. She could see the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. It was strange and wonderful to see. "Then we go together," he said finally. The mission launched 3 days later. Serafina and Daniel flew side by side in a small ship loaded with enough antimatter to crack a planet. Behind them came volunteers from every species in the Alliance. Velanthi, Crethany, Thrall, humans, and a dozen others. All of them willing to die. The Devourers came for them the moment they entered the nebula. Dark shapes moved through the red clouds, hungry and terrible. But Daniel's tactics held. They punched through the enemy lines, losing ships along the way, leaving burning wreckage behind them. Serafina flew their ship herself. Her crystal hands moved across the controls with perfect precision. Beside her, Daniel called out coordinates and enemy positions, his voice calm even as death closed in around them. They reached the center of the nebula. The 3 world ships loomed before them, each one larger than a moon. Ancient and horrible and patient. "Now," Daniel said. They released the charges and turned to run. The explosion caught them halfway out of the nebula. Their ship tumbled through space, systems failing, hull cracking. Serafina felt the heat even through her crystal skin. She heard Daniel cry out as he was thrown against a wall. Then everything went dark. She woke to silence. The ship was drifting, dead in the void. Emergency lights flickered red. The air was thin and getting thinner. Daniel lay beside her, bleeding from a wound on his head. But he was alive. His human heart still beat in his fragile chest. Did it work? He whispered. Serafina looked out through a cracked window. Behind them, where the crimson veil had been, there was only light. A great burning sphere of fire and energy, consuming everything. It worked, she said. They drifted for 3 days before rescue ships found them. 3 days with failing life support, sharing what little air remained. 3 days of darkness and cold and uncertainty. But they survived. Together. When they finally returned to the fleet, they found a galaxy transformed. The destruction of the 3 world ships had broken the Devourer advance. The monsters were retreating for the first time in anyone's memory. The Alliance had won. Not the whole war, not yet, but a victory that mattered. A victory that proved the Devourers could be stopped. Daniel stood on the bridge of a Volante cruiser, looking out at the celebrating fleet. Serafina stood beside him, her crystal hand holding his human one. "You almost died," she said softly. "So did you. I did not expect that. When I married you, I thought you would be safe. A symbol, nothing more. I never imagined we would fly into death together." Daniel turned to look at her. His eyes were tired but warm. "That is what marriage is, Serafina. Real marriage. You face the darkness together. You fight for each other. You survive together." Serafina felt something shift inside her. A feeling she had never known before. Something deeper than respect, stronger than alliance. She loved him. This strange, fragile, impossible human. She loved him. "When this war ends," she said, "we will build something new. Not just peace. Something better." Daniel smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him since they met. "I would like that very much." The war against the Devourers ended. 2 years after the Battle of the Crimson Veil. It was not a quick victory or an easy one. More battles were fought. More lives were lost. But the Alliance held together, and slowly, surely, they pushed the ancient monsters back into the darkness between galaxies. When the last Devourer ship fled into the void, the entire galaxy celebrated. For the first time in living memory, there was peace. Real peace. But Daniel Hayes was not finished. He had spent 5 years fighting. He had watched friends die and enemies become allies. He had learned things about the galaxy that no other human knew. And now, with the war over, he turned his attention to building something that would last. The Allied Council became permanent. What started as a desperate wartime alliance became a true government for the galaxy. Representatives from every species met regularly to discuss trade, disputes, and the future. Old enemies sat at the same table and talked instead of fighting. Many leaders resisted this change. The Volante nobles especially hated it. They had ruled their empire for thousands of years through strength and fear. Now they were being asked to share power with species they had once conquered. Lord Kethra confronted Daniel during one council session. Her crystal skin glowed dark with anger. "You have destroyed us," she accused. "The empire is falling apart. Our young nobles travel to human worlds instead of staying home. Our artists copy alien styles. Our bloodlines mix with lesser species. This is your fault." Daniel listened calmly. He had expected this moment for a long time. "The empire is not dying," he said. "It is changing. Everything changes eventually. You can fight that change and lose, or you can guide it and survive. You speak of change like it is natural, but you forced it upon us. You used the war to break our power. I used the war to save your lives." Daniel's voice was firm, but not angry. "The Devourers would have eaten your empire. Every last crystal noble and ship and world. I gave you a chance to survive by working with others." He stepped closer to Kethra, meeting her glowing eyes without fear. "I know you hate this. I know you wish things could go back to the way they were. But they cannot. The galaxy has seen what we can do when we work together. They will not forget. And neither should you." Kethra stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, Her glow began to fade to a calmer color. "You are the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered, human. Not because you are strong, because you make us want to follow you." She turned and walked away. But Daniel noticed that in the months that followed, she became one of his strongest supporters. Sometimes the hardest battles were won not with weapons, but with words. Serafina watched all of this with growing wonder. The man she had married as a political tool had become the most important person in the galaxy. Not through conquest or force, but through something harder to define. He made people believe in each other. One evening, they walked together through the gardens of their new palace. It was built on neutral ground, a world that belonged to no single species. Plants from 100 different planets grew there, creating a forest of impossible colors. "You frighten me sometimes," Serafina admitted. Daniel looked at her with surprise. "I frighten you? Why?" "Because you do not seek power, but everyone gives it to you. Because you do not want to rule, but everyone follows. Because you are ordinary, and yet you have changed everything." Daniel was quiet for a while. They walked past trees that glowed in the darkness and flowers that sang soft melodies. "I am not ordinary," he finally said. "I am broken. I survived something that should have destroyed me. I wake up every day expecting to find that this is all a dream, that I am still in that escape pod, watching my world burn." He stopped and turned to face her. "But that is the secret, Serafina. Humans are not special because we are strong. We are special because we are broken and we keep going anyway. We take our pain and turn it into purpose. We lose everything and find reasons to build again." He gestured at the gardens around them, at the impossible beauty they had created. "Every species in this galaxy has gifts that humans can only dream of. Telepathy, natural armor, centuries of life. But they have never learned what we know. That weakness can become strength. That suffering can become wisdom. That the thing that almost kills you can teach you how to live." Serafina understood then. She had wondered for years why the galaxy followed this one human. Now she knew that it was not because he was powerful. It was because he had been powerless and survived. Every broken creature in the universe saw themselves in him. Every victim of tragedy saw hope. "The Devourers are gone," she said. "The Alliance is stable. The old empires are transforming. What comes next?" Daniel smiled. It was a real smile, full of warmth and peace. "Now we live. We build families and make mistakes. We plant gardens and write songs. We have children who will never know war and grandchildren who will find wonders among the stars that we cannot. Imagine." He took her crystal hands in his human ones. "Now we find out what peace actually looks like." Serafina leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body against her skin. She had married a man to end a war. She had watched him topple worlds, not with weapons, but with hope. And now, standing in a garden of impossible beauty, she understood something profound. The galaxy had changed because one ordinary human refused to give up. He had lost his home, his family, his entire world. He had been broken in ways that should have ended him. But instead of surrendering to that pain, he had transformed it into something beautiful. That was the human gift to the galaxy. Not technology or strength or clever tactics. Just a simple, stubborn refusal to stop believing that things could be better. Serafina thought of her ancestors, the proud Valanthi queens who had built an empire through conquest. They would have laughed at the idea of sharing power, of building instead of conquering, of loving a fragile human. But they were wrong. All of them. All the old ways, all the ancient traditions, all the power and glory. It meant nothing compared to what she had now. She had a partner. She had a purpose. She had a future. "I love you," she said. Daniel held her closer. "I love you too." Above them, The stars burned with ancient light. Somewhere out there, new worlds waited to be discovered. New species waited to be met. New wonders waited to be found, and humanity would be there to find them. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as partners in a galaxy that had finally learned to work together. The alien queen had married a human for peace. She had watched his power topple worlds. And in the end, she had found something she never expected. She had found home.